Hi, I'm Lori Hammel, and these are our esteemed panelists. So very excited to have them here. I am going to very quickly have everyone introduce themselves and say a little bit about why you're here tonight and what you hope to impart to the actors. Chester?
Hi, my name is Chester Santos, United States memory champion, also known as the International Man of Memory. I give speeches all around the world on memory improvement techniques and how you can develop memory skills, apply those skills to become more successful in your career and personal life. So this is actually my full-time job, to give presentations on improving memory, and I hope to give you guys some valuable tips tonight. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. Lisa?
Hi.
Oh, yes, please do.
Hi, my name is Lisa Sun, and I'm not an actor, but I have watched a lot of actors. I enjoy watching movies and film. I'm a cognitive psychologist, and I work at Barnard College right now. And the work that I focus on is on learning and memory and something known as metacognition. Very simply put, thinking about your thinking or thinking about your learning. I've worked mostly with humans, so I'll probably talk a little bit about the human brain today regarding learning and memory.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lisa.
Hey everybody, my name is Joel De La Fuente, and I'm an actor. I'm so happy to be here tonight, largely too because I'm just really interested in what everybody has to say about memory, because as you all know, memorization is one of the many barriers to entry to doing our work. In my own work recently, I performed a one-person show. I have been doing it for the last couple of years, and obviously that entailed a lot of memorization. For 10 years, I was on Law and Order Special Victims Unit playing the tech guy, which involved a very particular kind of memorization. And then there's a show I'm on right now on Netflix called Hemlock Grove, which, oh gosh, thank you so much. Netflix doesn't release any numbers, but I know one person watches Hemlock Grove now for sure. I know the writer. Brian McGreevy? Very nice. And so on that show, there's a lot of techno-babble in it, and also speaking multiple languages sort of at the last second, which involves a very particular kind of memorization. So I'm interested in hearing different techniques from our experts here, and also to share any information that I might be able to give you guys on what that experience has been like. Thanks.
Wonderful. So part of what I think is really exciting about tonight is being able to take some of the technical side of things and then funnel it into how is it applicable for us as actors to be able to walk away tonight with having some tips or techniques or ideas that you hadn't thought of before that will help you as you memorize and go forward with that. And first of all, let's just talk a little bit. Could you just tell me, Lisa, how does memory work?
How does memory work? So this is probably the most complicated question you can ask any individual of any panel. This is a question that's been thought about for centuries. But to make it simple, we can focus kind of on the cognitive psychology perspective. In the mid-20th century, there was something known, this boom called the cognitive revolution. And this is where researchers really started to focus on what was going on in the brain, right? So there is a lot of research now on how the brain works. And at the same time this boom happened, there was an invention, and that invention was the computer, right? And so it was really convenient. So the brain was thought to be this information processor, just like the brain, right? We have input from the environment coming through our senses, whether it's visual or auditory or touch, etc. And then something happens in your brain magically, right? A lot of stuff happens that we can't really see, but somehow we're able to understand and make sense of whatever is coming through our senses, and we're able to spit it out. And this is exactly what happens when you think about a computer. The one difference, and this is the key difference, I think, is that we're not computers, right? We're not robots. And so there seems to be a special characteristic that the human brain has. Can you guys guess what it is? So some emotion, it's really interesting that you say emotion. I get that answer a lot. Self-reflection, right? And interesting when people talk about artificial intelligence now and robots. You know, there are a lot of robots who are pretty emotional, right? And that's the challenge, right? The humans are making the robots.
The meta part where you know that you're actually
Right, the meta part, right? And it's interesting, I've been thinking about robots a lot in the past few months, and you know, the other thing that I think is interesting that's different between humans and robots is that robots never feel uncertain, right? You've never met a humble robot, right? It's like they're all cocky. You know, you ask them a question, they just give you an answer. This is the answer, right? With humans, we have this ability to be okay with uncertainty to some degree, and we can talk about that more, but I think more and more we do feel uncomfortable with being uncertain, and that's kind of a risk, I think. Even with acting, right? We were talking earlier about it being important to be spontaneous, right?
And Joel, you had mentioned earlier too that it's not just about being able to have your lines down, it's being able to then use it and interpret it through your character, because if you just memorize, and maybe would you like to speak a little to that?
Sure. I think I've had experiences where, well, I had an audition today where I got it yesterday, and the note was, please have this memorized and off book by tomorrow. So, you know, the way my brain works is that becomes the most important thing, because that's what they've asked for. So, you know, I've had experiences in the past where I would then, without realizing it, devote all of my energy towards the memorizing of the lines. And then, you know, you show up to do your job or the audition, and then you realize that our job isn't just memorizing and then saying it back. So this feeling that I've spent all of my energy preparing the wrong thing. So I think it's really important as we learn new techniques or work on memorizing that it's a tool, it's an essential part of what we do, but it's not what we do. And we should never lose sight of the fact that it's one step along the way so we can do our jobs. But our jobs are not to memorize things. Our jobs are to interpret and to serve the work that we're doing.
So, Chester, when you talked a little bit earlier about how you started becoming this memory champion, can you give us a little bit of insight onto that? Because you're someone who has studied this, you're extremely accomplished with it. Can you go back a little bit into your background on how you became involved as a memory person?
Sure. So I happen to be known growing up as someone with a good memory. I would often get the comment, wow, you have a really good memory. And many years back in the year 2000, actually, I saw a segment on ABC's 2020. There was a segment on the United States National Memory Championship. One of the co-founders is sitting right there, Marshall Tarley, actually. And I saw what these people were accomplishing in the National Memory Championship, memorizing decks of cards in a few minutes, hundreds of digits. It sparked my interest because I was known for having a good memory. But when I tried to pull off those feats, I was not even close. So that's when I started going into studying memory improvement techniques. I found what worked best for me over the years, and I eventually reached a point to where I was good enough, and down the line I did win the United States National Memory Championship with a lot of training and practice.
That's wonderful. So tonight, Chester's going to have a couple of demonstrations for us that I think are going to be really exciting, and ideas that we might be able to incorporate into how we go forward as actors memorizing. So do you want to start with how it is to be a memory athlete? Do you want to go ahead and do that demonstration?
Sure. So in the United States Memory Championship, we have to memorize decks of playing cards, computer-generated random digits, poetry, random words, different things about people. I'm going to quickly do a demonstration with numbers to give you an idea of the sort of thing we do. Hopefully people will find this interesting. Can I get a single digit from 0 through 9, please? 7? Single digit 0 through 9. 9? Same thing. 5? 6? 8? 2? Go ahead.
Can I repeat one?
Yeah.
9.
Yeah, you can repeat digits as often as you'd like. 4. 7? 0. 1. 4. 3. Right there. 3 again? Okay. 3. Over there. 2. 5. Where? Oh, I didn't see. Sorry. I didn't see you. Sorry about that. Go ahead. Give it a single digit from 0 through 9. 1. Okay. Go ahead. 8. 2. 9. We're over there. 3. 0. Is that a lot of numbers yet, or it's enough? Okay. So let's see if I can remember that. Just let me know if I make any mistakes. I'll close my eyes maybe just to so you guys know I'm not looking at anything. I usually do it with my eyes open though. I think that number sequence was 7, 9, and then a 5, and then a 6, and then a 8, and then a 2, and then a 9, and a 4, and a 7, followed by a 0, then a 1, then a 4, then a 3, another 3, 6, 3, 2, then 5, 1, 8, and then a 2, and then was it 9, 3 with 0 last? That's right. So that's all training. This is all training. This all comes from learning the right techniques, practicing. This can help you to accomplish a lot of amazing things with your memory. I'll quickly do it backwards. Let me know if I make any mistakes. Right to left, bottom to top. Just let me know if I make a mistake. Backwards, I think it's 0, 3, 9, 2, 8, 1, 5, 2, 3, 6, 3, 3, 4, 1, 0, 7, 4, 9, 2, 86597, right? Those are the types of things we do in the United States National Memory Championship, things like that. But again, it's all come with training with techniques. Anyone can learn this stuff. It's going to make it much easier for you to remember many different types of information, and I'll get into that and specific techniques later on.
And wow, thank you so much. That was amazing. We also have some wonderful questions that several members filled out on their way here, so I want to make sure we get to that tonight too. So I want to ask you something, Lisa. Can your brain actually get too full? If you're doing things like you're memorizing a lot of different things, can your brain get too full? And if so, how can you reset?
So in terms of memory, there are different memory systems. One is sort of known as the short-term memory system, and we've all heard about this in different films and, you know, Memento, these types of movies, right? Short-term memory does have a capacity that's limited, and it seems like Chester has kind of gone way over that limit. But short-term memory typically, there was first thought to be a limit of 7 plus or minus 2 items. And that means if I were to read off a list of numbers, like this number, and then I asked you to write down or say the list exactly in the same order, right? People typically were able to remember around 7 items. Okay, but that got a little tricky, and Chester might talk about this. It got to be a little fuzzy because the term items can be defined in different ways. And I don't know about what technique you were using, but if you think about a chunk, right, you can put 2 numbers together or 3 numbers together, and it becomes then 1 chunk, which is also 1 item. So I think that's one of the strategies that people have used to try to get more items crammed into your short-term memory store. And acting is a little different, I think. I don't know a lot about acting, but I'm assuming that every actor has a different goal, and in education, right, we've all gone through school, typically the goal is not just short-term memory. And so I guess the question I had for you, Chester, are you going to remember that series of numbers in 10 years?
Not in 10 years. Maybe next week still, though.
Next week? Yeah, so the thing about education is we do want to remember information for the long term. And once things get into our long-term memory storage system, it's pretty much there for good. So there is no limited capacity for this. But the challenge is for people, for students, to get items from short-term memory to long-term memory. And that's a big challenge, right? In acting, I can imagine that, especially if it's an audition or a part that you just, you know, have for one day or a few days, you don't need to have items or the script in your long-term memory. But if you're a stage actor, maybe you're performing every night for months or weeks or years even, right there you really want to make sure that you get items into your long-term memory storage system.
And for you, Joel, for the show that you're doing, the one-person show, Hold These Truths, that you're continuing to do over a long period of time, what are you doing to go back into that script every time when you've had a break? Because that whole show is you.
Well, the interesting thing about that show too is that it's not like I'm doing the show for 3 years in a row. So I would do it maybe for 3 weeks, and then in 3 months will go by, and then I'll do it for a week, and then, you know, a year will go by or something. So that's been new for me too. An interesting thing. I'm hearing you talk, and I'm wondering what that process is, because I think for me, it's so much of my process is getting it out of what I perceive to be my short-term memory and into a place where I don't have to think about it. You know, then, and like where, because if you don't have to think about what your lines are, then that frees you up to do so many other things, like breathe, first of all, like listen, make yourself available, and you know, they're just. It's a never-ending series, I think, of it's a nonstop negotiation when you are acting, in that state of performing, because you are sort of sometimes having to pull things up consciously via your memory, and other times you sort of get into those periods where it's all easy and you are completely available and you're not thinking that the word that's coming out next is something that you already know because it's just available to you. So you can burn your calories somewhere else. So it seems to me, using this this vocabulary, that ideally it would be great to be able to take all of this information that you're trying to learn from your short-term memory, put it into your long-term memory, and then not have to think about it again. But one of the interesting things also, like one of the many complications that comes into it as actors, is we're not just sitting, and our intention is not just to repeat in order the number for you. There's a physical life involved. And that's an interesting thing to get into too, which is so much of what helps, I think, it helps me memorize, and I think helps a lot of people memorize, is physical action. Like, you can remember, like if you're trying to remember your lines, and then you're just sitting in your kitchen, and you're thinking, oh God, I can't remember the lines for scene 3 or whatever. But then if you stand up and start doing what you do in scene 3, suddenly you know all of your lines again. So there's that interesting relationship there. I remember, for many years on SVU, like, you would get these lines, these scenes where, I played this character, Morales, who was the Taru tech officer. So basically, everything I did was a complete dramaturgical necessity. I had to convey a certain amount of information, and it was all technical. So you would often, I would often get material a day or two before I was supposed to do it, and it was all in language that no one ever talks in, ever, ever, ever. Like, they would say, how's it going, Morales? And I would say, we're trying to triangulate the towers from A and B, and 42nd Street has gone down, and I don't know what we're going to do about the, And so then the first few times, I would just sit there and just try to cram it all in, and repeat it to get it. And then you would show up on the day, and I would feel reasonably confident about it. And then you'd show up, and you're a little nervous because you don't know anybody there that well yet. And so you're nervous that someone might be in a bad mood, or you don't want to stop the massive television mechanism that's there. So you get there, and you think, okay, I think I'm ready to go. And then someone hands you like a clipboard. And they say, okay, here's your clipboard. And, oh, wait, put on your coat. And then the director comes and says, hi, nice to meet you. So we're on action. You're going to start back here, and then you're going to open the door, and you're going to climb under the table, and then you're going to meet Mariska over here, and then you're going to go over here, and then you're going to be reaching for the thing right about this point. And so then all of a sudden, like, it all goes to hell in a handbasket. And then all of a sudden, you also begin to cede your authority, which I think, for me anyway, in my process, it is absolutely essential for you, by whatever means necessary, to convince yourself that you're the expert, no matter what. Whether you're barely holding on to your lines, or whether you've been doing it forever, when it's action or when it's time to go, whatever comes out of your mouth is the right thing. And you have to be able to do this in the face of number one on the call sheet right here, who you've never met before, and they make $16 million every 5 minutes, and like 500 people that you don't know, they're all looking at you, and they're setting up the lights, and it's taking them 3 hours. You have to be able to look at them and say, I just got this 5 minutes ago. I don't understand what, I haven't even had a chance to look up what this one word means yet. And when you say action, I'm going to crawl under the table, I'm going to get on the top of the thing, and I'm going to own it. And if you can do that, then then it suddenly gets so much easier. But so then you have to start asking the question of yourself individually, personally, what do I have to do to make myself feel comfortable and entitled in these situations? Because, and you really have to ask yourself that question, because you're going to be put in that situation. You're going to have that information, and your responsibility to convey that information, and you're going to have all these people around you, all of these responsibilities, all of these pressures, all of these nerves working on you. It's going to happen. That's a fact. So while you start preparing your material, you can't just prepare sitting on your kitchen table, because this is what's going to happen to you. So you have to sort of tailor your process to accommodate that reality. And I'll stop talking 1 second. Just one of the things that I would do related to this is what I started to do was I started to learn my lines in a way that was attached to random motion. So, you know, I would have like the triangulate the cell tower signal thing, and I would do it while loading the dishwasher, just over and over and over and over. And then I'd unload the dishwasher over and over and over again. And then I'd walk up the stairs, and then I'd walk down the stairs. And so it got to be, it wasn't wed to any specific physical action here, but I knew that by moving through space, I could say these lines. And that if you told me, and I could do different things while doing them. And there's something about moving your body in different ways while you're saying it that sort of enables you, you know, to sort of, you know, that sort of thing. And it starts to get the lines in there in a different way, and it also starts to make you begin that process of feeling entitled.
Wow, that's so powerful. Thank you so much, Joel. It's so helpful. You know, the idea, there's a friend of mine, Jack Plotnick, who says it's not the actor who knows all the lines that's going to get the job. Just because you know the lines, that doesn't mean you're going to get the job. But having the lines once you've got the job, and even being able to show up at the audition with a level of confidence, like you were saying, Lisa, that the robot has no uncertainty, you know, and it's just like we give ourselves that. Working with those lines and being able to move forward when you have something like movement changing everything or emotion changing everything too. And Chester, from something that I had read about your work, you talk about something that's unusual to help you anchor in and remember something. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, there are three main principles that I employ in order to pull off amazing memory feats. I've done some crazy ones on TV. I memorized all of the Kentucky Derby results since it started in the year 1875. The reporter would call out any random year between 1875 and 2010 at that point, and I would instantly give the name of the winning horse, the winning jockey, and the winning time down to 100th of a second. For PBS Nova Science, as part of the filming, they were going to do for that episode, it was called How Smart Can We Get? You can watch that for free on the PBS website, How Smart Can We Get? I memorized the entire United States Congress, the House and the Senate, everyone's first name, last name, state, district number, political party, all committees that they're on, special positions within those committees. It was more than 4,000 pieces of data. I've done many crazy memory feats over the years as well as in competition. Three main principles that I employ. One, visualization. We are very good at remembering things that we see. So it's important to take whatever it is that you are trying to commit to memory, and I mean anything. This could be lines from script, it could be numbers, it could be names, whatever it may be. Try to visualize that, turn that into a simple series of memorable images. It could be actually condensed into one image or a series of images. That's one thing you want to do. Second thing, try to utilize additional senses from there. The more senses that you involve when you're trying to encode information, the more of your brain you're activating, the more connections that you're building in your mind to the information, so it makes it much easier to retrieve that information later on. Third and final thing is making all of that you're experiencing in your mind crazy, unusual, extraordinary, because there is a psychological aspect to our memory. We tend to remember things with little to no effort. We remember things that happen to us that are strange, unusual, out of the ordinary. If this were to happen right now, if this actually happened, if an elephant came crashing through those back doors right now, and it started spraying water all over everyone in here with its trunk, you might all remember that for the rest of your life and always tell that story. You'll never believe this. I was at this memory panel. An elephant just crashed in the room. It may be stuck there forever without you putting forth any effort to commit that to memory, right? Scientists don't even fully understand how this works in the brain, how some things just in an instant transfer into long-term memory, whereas others don't. They don't fully understand that process. However, we do realize that there is this psychological aspect to our memory, and we can actually harness that and apply it to things that would be useful for us to remember, things that would help us out in our career, in our personal life, maybe even in school. So when you combine those three principles, it becomes very easy to remember anything at all. And that's that's how I go about doing all of these memory stunts.
Wonderful. Well, that is really helpful. Lisa, when you look at these kinds of techniques, what's happening behind the scenes in that?
Yeah, so while both Joel and Chester have been talking, the thing that I kept thinking about was something known as cued recall or cued remembering. Like Chester was saying, we have all these connections in our brains. So whenever you encode something, whenever you learn a particular line or meet someone or experience some event, you're actually organizing it in your brain somewhere, right? And I think the one thing that we do know is that we do automatically organize our brain into different categories. So for example, if I say cold, something popped into your head probably. What might it have been? Ice. Ice cream, anything. So there are certain words that people have in common that pop into your heads, and that means that there's a particular cue that helps you remember information. And so when Joel was talking about saying your lines, right, while you're loading the dishwasher, unloading the dishwasher, going up the stairs, doing all these different kinds of motions, those are all behaviors that are becoming encoded with that actual item or experience. So later, if the director actually tells you to run up the flight of stairs, the line's just going to pop into your head, right? Because all memory is cued. We organize it in a certain way. I think the danger, though, that we have to remember is that we can't be doing the same thing all the time, right? And this happens in school, right? It used to be that when we were young, we had assigned seats very often, and there's something known as transfer appropriate processing. And this what it means is that if you're studying in the same exact environment as when you're tested or when you need to remember the information, your retrieval will be stronger. We know that. But the problem is when you're in school and you're sitting at that desk, you're not going to be sitting at that desk for the rest of your life, right? You can't count on that one environment to be your cue to remember that script. So the trick is to make your environment or the cues that will be connected to this particular line, right, or this particular piece of information connected to variability, right? Because that's what life is. You're always going to be put in variable situations. And even if you do a show, I think the same show every night, I can imagine there's a lot of different spontaneous variable situations, not only externally, but even internally, cognitively in your mind. So what you want to do is practice or rehearse your lines in variable situations. And I would say the same thing to students who are trying to study for an exam, right? They shouldn't just be sitting in their rooms at a desk, right? They should be in study groups. You should be studying at the cafeteria. You should be studying under a tree. You should be talking to yourself out loud. There are all of these different strategies that are really helping the variable cues that are becoming connected in your brain to that particular piece of information that you want to study. And again, this is all good for long-term learning. And so I think the ironic thing about acting is often you don't necessarily need to have the long-term knowledge for all of these different lines for your jobs. But ironically, you do one thing that's kind of natural for actors is a very beneficial strategy for memory, for long-term memory. And that's something known as generation, right? Often, I can't imagine, but probably when you are studying for your lines, are you just reading it silently? Probably not. That's what students do all the time, all their lives. And it's known as passive learning. It's not going to get them anywhere. In fact, all of you, after you leave tonight, will probably forget everything we said because you're not doing the talking, right? And this is a serious problem in education, right? Students are often passively sitting, listening to a lecture where they're not, some people are doing zero talking, right? And they're taking notes, but even that's a passive thing, and you're taking notes in short-term memory. It's not even at a delay. There's no long-term memory, right? And so that's one of the things that actors have as an advantage. You are saying things out loud. Now, the only thing you need in addition to that, I think, is saying things out loud at a delay without looking at the script, right? And so probably expert actors all know this, but students often don't know this, right? So how many of you in high school or college, right, you're reading through a text you need for an exam the next day. You read it all, you think you got it, and you close the book, you say, I got it. And that's it. But the problem is we don't study and retrieve or test ourselves at a delay in the long term, right? So that's one of the interesting things about real life, I guess, versus acting.
Can you explain just a little bit more about what you're talking about with the delay?
Oh, so short term, remember we talked about short term. The short term storage system is typically thought to be a few seconds to maybe up to an hour or a few hours. So when you were talking about this audition, right, that you get a script and you need to be prepared for the next day, we're really well practiced in this. How many of you, during school, you learn passively the entire semester and all of a sudden it's the night before the exam? It's just like acting. It's just like these auditions. And you're at a real problem right now, right? I mean, students, what do you have to do? The only thing you can do is cram all of that information that you've learned for the past 4 months into your little brain for that few hours. And you don't even have time to sleep, right? And that's not gonna be helpful at all. But the thing is, and this is where it gets a little bit, I think, fuzzy also, there are probably a lot of you, and there are a lot of people who do get by and succeed in school by cramming all the time. That means they get that grade they want. And it's because often the test is in short-term memory, right? It's only a few hours later. So you'll get the job. You'll get the
I will?
You'll get the job. You'll get the job. The problem is in school, you need to build on that information and accumulate long-term knowledge, right? Your goal in school is not to take the exam, get an A, and then let it all decay from short-term memory, right? But in acting, if that's your goal, right, then that's fine for an audition. But again, if you have to do something over and over for a longer period of time, it's not going to do it for you. You can't cram and then think that you'll have savings later, right? So I guess you said you do a show, the one-man show, for a few weeks and then maybe a few months later, right? And do you remember all the information a few months later?
No, I don't even remember all the information when I'm doing the show.
So it's a little bit different, I think, with acting. And again, the spontaneity is a big part of acting that I haven't thought about a lot when we're thinking about education and learning and memory. So it's a little bit different. Someone has a question.
Right, we're having all the questions tonight that everyone wrote in. Okay, thank you. So I wanted to ask you, Chester, when you get stuck on something, when you're in a situation where you've memorized something, and all of a sudden, oh my gosh, I don't know what's next. How does that work? Because how do you anchor in so that you could get back on track? Because, for instance, seeing you being able to do this exercise here and pause sometimes in between and get, knowing what the next thing is going to be, what are some kinds of anchors that we can all use when we're going through something that we have memorized, but all of a sudden it's like, oh, I just went blank. What can people do to anchor in?
So I have a lot of things to hit on quickly. One, I just wanted to talk about what she was hitting on, the delay, the concept of delay. So I talked with some researchers at Washington University in St. Louis, and they were telling me same type of thing, but they called it spaced review. So in other words, it's much more effective to review something today than the next day, maybe a couple of days after that, than it would be to review it just 10 times in a row today. So I just wanted to give that as a tip, as a spacing out of your review is more effective than just a one-shot cram. Another thing that Joel was talking about, the moving around. I gave a TEDx talk with a professor from NYU, and she just released a book called Happy or Healthy Brain, Happy Life. Healthy brain equals a happy life. And one concept in there is that moving around while you're learning information, being physically active, somehow aids the learning process. So I just wanted to hit on those two things that they already talked about, but just reinforce that. In terms of drawing a blank, how do you recover from that? There's so many different techniques that I teach. I'm going to quickly hit on one, and that is the method of loci. This technique originated with the ancient Greeks. It was used later in history by the Roman orators. It was known as the Roman room method. So the Roman orators gave speeches hours in length from memory without any notes. Right? The famous orator Cicero used this technique. Modern memorizers like myself refer to it as the journey method. So Lisa mentioned linking information to different anchors. Maybe you're opening up the dishwasher, the staircase, those are your anchors. But she mentioned as an issue with that is if you're not there, if you're not sitting at that desk, if you're not there, that could be an issue. But with this Roman room technique, you are mentally going through locations from your environment, and you're storing information along those locations. So how in the United States Memory Championship, we have to memorize a 50-line poem that's written specifically for the competition, so there's no chance that anyone has ever seen it. They make it very difficult to memorize. It doesn't rhyme. Not only do we have to memorize that poem line for line, word for word, we have to also indicate if a word was in italics or bold. They make it tricky where a line ends in a semicolon, but another one ends in a comma, and you wouldn't be able to tell why that's the case for that particular line. We have to, every last detail has to be memorized perfectly, or you're going to get 0 points. How I do that is I simply come up with imagery like a mini story that I'm seeing playing in my head that reminds me of each line of the poem, and I link it to the corresponding location of my journey. So, and I use that not only for poetry, and I recommend this for lines of a script, but also for something like this. So I memorize this by opening up my front door, and I see a couple dancing, so I know that it starts 7, 9, 5, and then I see them doing a particular type of dance, which I've encoded as 6, 8, 2, and then I go to the next location of my journey, which is my cupboard, and I see their bark from a tree, so I know it's 9, 4, 7. And then a tire is rolling up the bark of the tree, so I know it's 0, 1, 4. Next to that is my refrigerator. I see a girl from my tennis club who is 3, 3, 6, and so on. So I'm anchoring, as was mentioned by both of them, but I can easily retrieve those anchors anytime I want, no matter where I am at physically, because I'm accessing those anchor points mentally. So this is an incredibly powerful, useful technique. Again, it originated with the ancient Greeks. The Roman orators used it. This is going to be incredibly useful and effective for actors to memorize lines. I can get into a quick exercise that I had talked about doing. I don't know if now is a good time.
Now sounds like a perfect time.
Okay, well, we're going to do a quick exercise. I'm going to have you all commit to memory without writing anything down. You're using nothing but your brain, nothing but your memory here. You are all going to commit to memory a random list of words to get an idea of how these memory techniques work that memory champions like myself use. The word list is going to be monkey, iron, rope, kite, house, paper, shoe, worm, envelope, pencil, river, rock, tree, cheese, and quarter. Okay, that's the random list of words. Let's see who looks confident here in the audience. Oh, what's your name?
Me, Bill.
Bill, did you want to give it a try? Recite it
I
back.
put my hand up in front of my face because I said, oh God,
I was totally kidding with you. I wouldn't expect to have you, I wouldn't expect you to have that committed to memory. When I recite that list of words to audiences, a lot of times I get looks from people in the audience as if you're crazy. There's no way I'm going to be able to remember that, not unless you give me a lot of time to do it. But in fact, using these memory principles that I briefly talked about earlier, you are all going to have the entire list of words committed to memory, forwards and backwards, with just 3 to 4 minute study time. And even next week, you will still remember it forwards and backwards without ever looking at this again. So you'll start to realize how powerful these techniques are. I want for you all to simply visualize what I described to you. The first word was monkey, so I want for you all to see in your mind a monkey, okay? This monkey is dancing around, it's making monkey noises, whatever a monkey would sound like. I'm not a good actor, I can't do these sounds, or whatever a monkey would sound like, make sure you see and hear this monkey. And the monkey now picks up a gigantic iron, because that was the second word. So I want for you guys to visualize that. This monkey is dancing around with this gigantic iron. The iron starts to fall, and a rope attaches itself to the iron. Maybe even feel that rope. Maybe it feels sort of rough, okay? If you're smiling and giggling during this exercise, it's a very good sign. You're going to remember it. The key here is to have fun with this. So rope, you're feeling the rope. You look up the rope, and you notice that the other end of the rope is attached to a kite. And this kite is flying around in the air. It's flying around in the air. Maybe you reach up and try and touch it, but it's just out of your reach, that kite. The kite you see now smashes into the side of a house. Really see it crash into the side of a house. This house, you notice, is completely covered in paper. It's completely covered in paper. Picture that. Next word was paper. Out of nowhere, a shoe appears, and it starts to walk all over that paper. Maybe it's messing up the paper as it's walking on it, that shoe. The shoe smells pretty badly, so you decide to investigate and see why. Inside of the shoe, you find a little worm crawling around inside of that shoe. Really see that worm. The worm jumps out of the shoe and into an envelope. Really see it go into the envelope. Next word was envelope. A pencil appears out of nowhere now, and it starts to write all over the envelope. It's frantically writing on the envelope, that pencil. The pencil now jumps into a river, and there's a huge splash for some reason when that little pencil hits the river. You notice now that the river is crashing up against a rock. See that river crashing up against the rock. The rock flies out of the river, and it crashes into a tree. Really see it crash into the tree. This tree is growing cheese. Bet you haven't seen that one before. The tree is growing cheese, and out of each piece of cheese shoots a quarter. A quarter shoots out of each piece of cheese. Last word was quarter, as in 25 cents, okay? I'm going to go through this again, but very quickly now, and your job at this point is to simply replay through this little story that you've created in your head. So we had the monkey was dancing around with an iron. The rope attached itself. The other end of the rope was attached to a kite. The kite crashed into the house. The house was covered in paper. The shoe walked on that. Inside of the shoe was the worm. The worm jumped into the envelope. A pencil wrote in the envelope. The pencil jumped into the river. The river crashed into the rock. The rock flew into the tree. The tree was growing cheese. Out of each piece of cheese shot a quarter. So you should be able now to pretty easily recall the entire random word list by simply going through the story in your mind and recalling each major object that you encounter. Let's do this very quickly as a group. Together in unison, call out those random words on my cue with the first one, monkey, iron, rope, kite, house, paper, shoe, worm, envelope, pencil, river, rock, tree. Excellent. Give yourselves a round of applause there. Nice job. So that is just one of many, many different types of techniques that memory champions like myself use to pull off these incredible feats of memory with poetry, random words, even very complex types of information can be memorized using this. Harvard University hired me to give seminars for their graduate students, Harvard law students, business students, medical students. anyone can learn this stuff, and as you can see, it's very powerful and effective.
Thank you. That was really interesting, Chester. Wow. I think it's also really empowering, too. It's like, hey, we all just memorized this fun story. And so, Joel, you had a situation in Hemlock Grove where you had to do foreign language in the different episodes, or was it just in one episode where you had to do a bunch of different foreign languages?
It started with one, and then there are a couple more. But in this season coming up, there's like one in every episode. Just like a little taste of a language.
So when you are dealing with something like a foreign language, how have you approached it as in a way that helps you to incorporate it into your character, that your character would know this foreign language? But would you tell the story about what happened, how you ended up having to speak all these different languages?
The reason why it happened was in the second season of Hemlock Grove, in the first episode, there's a character that appears who is a Russian speaker, and the actress that they got to play it really spoke Russian fluently, and so the writers had not accounted for someone being that much of an expert, and so on the set she offered to translate a lot of these scientific lines into Russian, and they said, sure, great. So she was speaking part Russian and some English, back and forth, and then at the very end, we thought, wouldn't it be funny if my last line to her, which was short, was just in Russian, like 2 or 3 words or something that she could teach me just, in that moment. And so what that did story-wise was, it revealed that she was, she's this Russian scientist, but she's speaking in Russian and English and blah, blah, blah. And at the end, when I respond in Russian without comment, you just thought, oh, I guess Price speaks Russian. And they loved that idea. So, and they liked that it didn't comment on it at all. So then they were like, well, let's see if he can speak this language. So then I got the script, and there was, I can't remember what the second language was. There's language. Anyway, so then it got to be this thing where it was just sort of like a, because the writer's room is in Los Angeles, and we were shooting in Toronto, and they watch the dailies, and it got to be this thing like, well, let's see what happened today. And so then I was sort of thinking, I totally have that. So then I would work really hard to do it, and so then it just got to be this thing. And so then this next season, like there's, Greek and stuff, and until the end, they were trying to do the upside down exclamation point African bush language, but they couldn't find anybody to do it.
So how did you memorize those foreign languages?
Alcohol, really.
The secret is revealed.
No, I really wish that we had had this conversation, before, because I would love to explore those things. Really, it was just, one thing that might be of use. Basically, it was just sort of getting it with, they would try to give me as many days as possible. So, like, by the time the season was going, maybe 3 or 4 days to learn something. They would try to make it a sentence or 2 or 3 or something, and then get someone who spoke the language to record it and then give it to me, and then basically I would learn it that way. But what I thought was really helpful would be, because when I first got it, and with lines in general, like, for example, this audition that came last night, my instinctive response is to cram. Like, okay, I'm going to put in a ton of work on this, and I'm going to take 5 hours. I'm going to just drill the hell out of it. And I think what really helps a lot more is to work intensely for maybe 5 to 15 minutes. Intensely, like using all of these different things, like working physically and delaying or that kind of thing, and then doing something else, like releasing it completely. And it's only 5 to 15 minutes, and then maybe in an hour or two go back and do 5 more minutes. And that if I can accumulate and sleep, like if I can find time to sleep between those things, if circumstances allow it, those short concentrated bursts in quantity are greater than a large amount of time in one shot. I found that if I can return to it again and again and again, the more times I can return to it, the more chance, because the first couple of times it's completely discouraging because I don't remember anything. And I forget that this is how it works, and I get frustrated. But if you just keep at it, then the 3rd or 4th time, you sort of you remember it. And then the 5th time, you don't even have to start thinking about it. You just sort of have it. It just starts to make its way in there. So time is your friend. If you don't have a ton of time, then break it up into small sequences and have multiple shots at it. But also I find that anything over 15 minutes of intense work, it's counterproductive. You can't maintain a level of, it's sort of like asking yourself to sprint for 5 hours. Like, you can't do it. So sprint, rest, sprint again, rest. And, you know, physically speaking, that's better for your health anyway. So you get stronger faster that way.
That's great, thank you. Lisa, as far as the science of having sleep when you're memorizing something, can you talk a little bit about that, the best way to utilize sleep?
Yeah, definitely. One of the ways in which to get items from short-term memory into long-term memory is a process known as consolidation. And consolidation occurs pretty well when you're asleep, right? Your brain is constantly working, right? And if you're awake, you're kind of thinking about your own thing and being distracted and being stressed out or using these wrong techniques. But when you're asleep, your brain is working. There's something in your brain, in your temporal cortex, known as the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is really where this memory consolidation is taking place. Unfortunately, we know this because of patients who've had brain damage. People who've had brain damage to the temporal lobe or have had their temporal lobes taken out for various reasons, namely epilepsy. And they're cured of their seizures, but they've lost the ability to consolidate information, meaning they do have short-term memory, right? But and they could have older long-term memories because there's no time limit on the long-term memories that they have, but they can no longer remember new memories that they've learned after the surgery or the accident or the brain damage. So this is, and the one thing that I wanted to add to what Joel had said, which is really interesting because I don't act and I've never tried to audition for a part or
Is this
remember
the
a
alcohol
script.
part? Is there something about alcohol?
So that was an interesting part too. There are definitely studies going back to the transfer appropriate processing. There's a particular study that shows if you're learning while you're drunk, you better come to the exam drunk because the environment in your head is the same.
Rewind the tape like 15 seconds.
So it is. It's also known as transfer appropriate processing. But of course, we also know, as I said before, we're not drunk our entire lives, right? So, if you learn while you're sober, stay sober for the audition, right? But the one thing that I wanted to add to your cramming, right? And this is something that I'm just assuming or imagining with actors. And if I were the casting agent, I guess, and I was listening to your auditions, I think I would be more impressed, not with perfectly memorized lines. I would be more impressed if the few lines that you did remember, or the gist that you had, was really felt like your own. Right? It's really your own experience. It's not something that you're pretending or acting. And this kind of goes back to the robot, right? We're not robots. It's not as though everyone would come to the audition knowing the same exact lines, knowing the same exact words, and having the same emotions and the same kind of rhythm, right? And thinking about this more and more, acting seems so difficult. So difficult. So I have so much respect for those of you who can do this, and it seems like just a lifelong kind of art that you really have to work on. And with acting, that's the thing, because it's all pretend. But the thing about humans is that, what makes a good actor, I think it is when you're believable, and that the only way that can happen, I think, is if it was your own and it actually did happen to you. So that goes back to kind of the connections that we have in our brain, right? There's one reason why I think even actors always need to have as their goal long-term memory, not short-term, right? And that's because everything's being accumulated, right? If you have to learn a script for some drama, right, and you've never done a drama before, right, but you have all these other scripts in your knowledge state already, you're much more likely to be able to make connections with whatever you've done before, right? And it's kind of analogous to the student. I don't know if you probably have students who come and say, oh, I just want to take this for the easy A, it's not my major, right? They think they could just get an A and then it's okay to forget it all. But what they're really sacrificing is long-term creativity and making more connections with and building on whatever it is that they're learning. And so that's something that I guess I want to kind of suggest is that even if you have different projects, trying to connect them all into a theme, or I think that would make it more real, kind of, and it's personal, right? Or experience that you've already had. Right.
Oh, that's very interesting because part of some techniques that people have are being able to have emotional recall with different characters that they're doing and the lines and being able to bring that experience to it. It's just so wonderful to hear you talking from such a technical point of view and in so many ways really honoring the actor and the difficulty of this journey, which is why we have seminars like this, because as we were talking earlier, Joel, about like how we're expected as actors to be experts on so many different areas. It's really astounding what you have to be good at in order to navigate a career as an actor, so many different aspects. And speaking to that, when you're involved in a project, one project that you're already doing or memorizing lines for a certain project, and then something else comes in and you have to do that as well and juggle it, maybe could you speak a little bit about compartmentalizing, like how has that worked for you when you have multiple things that you're working on memorizing at the same time?
So the way that I actually commit things to memory, I create mental filing cabinets in my head. So they're filed away in completely different places, so there's never any confusion. I wanted to give quick tips, my tips on foreign language and complex terminology. So again, it's going to be all visualization based. I teach Korean in a workshop, but also how to apply that to any language. So let's say you wanted to commit to memory that the Korean word for bread is bong. Okay.
Bang.
Bang. You might. I know the word. I don't know how to pronounce it correctly.
We have extra help right here.
Bang. Nice. You might imagine.
Dr. Lisa
You
Song.
might imagine that a loaf of bread is like a ping pong paddle, right? So that when you need to retrieve, and you're actually playing with it like a ping pong paddle. When you need to retrieve that word for bread, immediately the loaf of bread comes back. You're thinking pong, and then how do you say it actually?
Bang.
It's enough. It'll be enough to remind you of that word that you were studying, whether it be from CDs. So basically, you create a mental cue to help retrieve the memory of the correct word that you're looking for. Water, is it 물?
물.
Mul, okay. You might imagine a giant pool of water, but who comes to jump in and swim? A cow jumps in and swims in it. So it's no longer a pool of water, it's now a mul of water. So this is a quick way. I mean, you can really learn a lot of foreign language vocabularies very quickly using this visualization concept. In terms of complex terminology, let's say on the script, you're having trouble pronouncing the word diverticulitis. Say that's a word in the script. I turned it into a funny image. So you might see a diver, and he just keeps tickling himself the whole time because this diver has tickleitis, okay? At least that you're telling yourself that's what it is, diverticulitis, while you're visualizing that. That's going to help you to be able to say that word diverticulitis, okay? So again, it's creating this crazy, memorable imagery.
Love it. That's very helpful. Everything that you're saying, that I feel so, this is so interesting because there's so many different aspects that we're hitting on. From a scientific point of view, Lisa, what can you do about fatigue? Because everybody is living in New York City, running around, getting a million things done all the time. An audition comes in, and you're exhausted already. So can you talk a little bit about ways to deal with exhaustion, or also the optimal way to be able to be memorizing?
Yeah, so there's really no way, I think, to deal with exhaustion except to sleep, to get the rest. I mean, if you're already exhausted and you just got this script, there's not a lot that you can do. If you think about short-term memory, you know, in our memory, I was talking about the temporal lobe and the hippocampus, but another area of our brain that we use a lot because we're human is our frontal lobe, right? And this is what really the largest part of our brain that other species don't have as much of. And this is where we do our planning, our organization. This is where we have our personalities, right? We also know this from brain-damaged patients, right? There's a very well-known case, the very first kind of case study was someone called Phineas Gage. And he was someone working on the railroads, and there was some kind of explosion, and there was a spike that went straight up his eye, out his frontal lobe, the frontal part of his brain, but he never lost consciousness. He was, he went to the hospital, he was healed, and he actually went back to work. But the thing is, something had changed, and people didn't want to work with him anymore. Right? And so the frontal lobe, we know, is where we have our self, right? It's our own individual personality. And that's also what we need to make any kind of decisions about allocation of study time, learning, right? Where we want to attend. And if we're stressed or exhausted, that's taking up our frontal lobes, right? We don't have the capacity anymore to make optimal decisions in any way. The only thing that can be done is really thinking ahead, right? And unfortunately with acting, it seems like you get a lot of scripts the day before the audition. I didn't know this. So there's not a lot of help there. But whenever you have hopefully some long-term projects, you get a script and you have a few weeks or a few months to work on it. Again, it's little bursts, right? It's the spacing practice paradigm, right? It's the little bursts every single night. And it's the same in school, whatever you're trying to learn. And I tell my students all the time, just a few minutes every night. You shouldn't be wanting to learn this information for an exam that's months away. You should be wanting to learn it because you want to learn it, right? And that's a big problem. But with actors, you already have that motivation. You want to learn it. So I think maybe it's just kind of the bursts that you want to focus more on and making it connected to your own life in some way. Right.
Can I ask a question of you guys? Yeah. This sort of, because I find that if I haven't been working and I get an audition, it's very difficult to memorize something. And then with the one-person show, for example, then it's really hard to get going. And then once or during a season, like when you're shooting a show over the course of a season, once you get past the first couple of episodes, it gets easier and easier and easier and easier to remember your lines. And that you sometimes get changes at the last second, and maybe the first time you're really nervous, and so it's sort of hard, but the more you become convinced that it's no problem, and you're also empowered because you're working every day, so you're not terrified someone's going to snatch it away from you, then you, and also just because you're practiced, I guess. I don't know, like all of these factors, I don't know, it just becomes, I feel like I get in better shape, memory-wise.
It's true, I think it is just the practice, right? And it's the retrieval, it's the generation that you're doing over and over so often, and I don't know how actors practice on their own. But there might be some things where you don't do it out loud, right? Or you're not doing it on your own, or you're getting help from someone else or from the script. But by having the show every night, you're doing it from memory, long-term memory, and you're generating it on your own. So that's really well practiced, I think. I think the only danger is, as your show goes on and you're more and more well practiced, are you becoming more robotic or not? So
That's not up to me to answer that question.
so it's interesting because there, when researchers give presentations, we're often taught in grad school by some other researchers and mentors that you don't want to practice your talk too much. If you practice your talk too much, it comes out more robotic. And so I'm wondering, when you're acting, if it's so overdone, so over-practiced, can the audience tell that? It's kind of...
Well, I think it's interesting. I mean, I don't think there's any single answer to this, but as we were doing the exercise that you gave, I was thinking, how on earth is this going to work as an actor when it's like, that's a hell of a subtext you have going on, like the monkey and the iron. Like, what am I going to do giving them monologue thinking monkey, iron, kite? Rope. Fuck. But then I thought, what that does is, because the whole point is just to get it in there. You're getting it in there, and once it's in there, because I think the danger is if it comes out exactly the same way every single time without the impulse to speak, without the intention, the action to want to achieve it, then maybe I think you run that risk. But I think if you have it all in there by whatever means necessary, they're almost like arrows in a quill. Like it's up to you to take them out. And it's not just, if your intention and your action is to repeat what you've learned, if your intention is just to memorize and to repeat, then maybe you run that risk. But as I've said at the beginning, and I think this is so important, that this memorization is just a part of your process, and it really should be near the beginning of your process, ideally. Although that's almost never, we don't get a chance to choose, how this all works out. But our work is just getting started. Like, our work is really about that discovery moment and finding and being attentive to what it is that we want and what we're going to do to get it, and that's what moves us to speak or to not speak or to do this or to do that. And it's important to remember that, I think.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I don't know a lot about acting, but there's something in the cognitive field that many researchers talked about known as theory of mind. I don't know if you've heard of theory of mind, but this is slightly different from metacognition, right? Metacognition is you thinking about yourself. Theory of mind is, do I know what you're thinking about? And I think that's what, when you're an actor, that's a really important piece of
Actors are really good about thinking about themselves.
Well, really? So with comedy, right? Comedians, they really have to know the other. Otherwise the joke doesn't work, right? You have to know your audience, and I don't know, with acting, when you're working with others, if you know where they are and they know where you are, and you're more aware of how they're moving or their bodily behavior, and those are all going to be cues, and that's actually going to be helpful for you to kind of anticipate what's going on. So I think theory of mind is also probably a big part of it, and I don't know how you would fit that into a kind of rehearsal schedule, and I don't know if most of you do your rehearsing on your own, and then that's a little bit more difficult, right?
Well, I think as people are preparing for auditions, they're definitely doing it on their own unless you get somebody else to help you run your lines. You may not even have the opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
We have a few questions from the audience, and I'd really like to read them and be able to see what we can answer here. I wondered if you considered speed reading a good way to memorize, learning to say the lines very quickly without thinking while moving objects around. So would that be helpful, doing the speed reading?
So I actually think not. That's maybe a shorter. So if you've ever taken piano lessons, and I've seen this happen when I was little. We all have taken piano lessons, and we've all hated it, and we've all done it, and we've gone to recitals, right? And there have been times, hopefully you might have seen this, but there are times when you get to the front of the stage, you sit down, and you can't even remember your first note, right? And there's a reason for this, and that's because you've practiced with your motor memory, with your fingers, just in a rote manner. You never thought consciously about it. So that's what you were relying on. When you're in the actual situation, actual recital, or the actual audition, you're gonna be a little stressed. You're gonna say, I need to be thinking about this. And if you hadn't thought about it during study or rehearsal, you're not gonna remember the lines. And you're gonna choke. And I think that's what, I'm not sure what speed reading really entails, but that seems to be more of a rote kind of hurry and just get it in. But again, I think it's a quick learning and a quick decay.
I'm the one who wrote that. May I say something? Just quickly? Just that I thought the idea of what works for me is that I'm able to do it just by not thinking at all, okay? So I'm just saying, blah, 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 move things around, the lines are all coming out, and if I can get to that point, then I can put the memorization aside, then be in the moment, and I have all the room and all the time in the world to feel it, and because I know it won't trip.
Yeah,
Because
so
I was able to do it without thinking.
yeah,
That's what I'm
so
saying.
definitely, yeah, if you have the time to do that and then add yourself and your emotions and get the depth of the encoding and the rehearsal, then I think it's fine.
I just wonder actually if by the time you're doing that speed read, there's already been memorization work that allows you to do the speed read. Just a thought I've had when you said that. You know what I mean? That maybe you're doing work you're not even aware of, so that by the time you're able to do that speed read, it's because you have it in more of a memory that you're able to do it. So then you feel confident you can set it aside and move to the next. Perhaps, you know.
Okay, so let's go on to the next question. What can emotional elements do to memory? I seem to go up in intense emotional scenes.
Go up means to lose the line, forget.
Oh, sorry. Okay, yeah. All right. So one of the questions that we have about this is that I'm wondering, is there a different part of the brain or the memory that deals with emotion? Because when you're learning lines, basically you're just trying to get the information in. When you have emotion, is that another part of you, and how might you be able to work together with that?
Yeah.
This was my question. She sort of touched upon it when you said there was damage to the emotional, and then the stress factor lives there too, and the organization lives there. And I thought, oh my God, I myself as a Shakespearean actress, and the organization of Shakespeare sort of allows me to memorize, But then you add emotion into that, and what emotion does to your ability to memorize is really
So and Chester kind of hinted at it before. It's really interesting, and it's I think it's quite complicated. The hippocampus is really the part of our brain that is stimulated or lights up whenever you experience an event that's a neutral. It could be a neutral event. Right near the hippocampus is something known as the amygdala. It's also in your temporal lobes, right above your ears. And the amygdala is the organ in the brain that is responsible for emotional memory. So you have a lot of kind of neurotransmitters giving off kind of this stress signal. If you have a little bit of stress, a little bit of kind of stimulation in the amygdala, that's actually helping your memory of neutral events because they're making connections to your hippocampus. So the consolidation will be stronger.
I wonder if when he says he moves and he's doing dishes, if just that enough, that physical stress, I mean, it's not an extreme stress given, but it is somewhat of a stress because there's a stress of concentration perhaps, is helping.
Yeah, and that's more frontal lobe. I don't think dishes are emotional enough doing the dishes. That's
But do they
more of
work
your
for you, Joel?
Are they very stressful?
You haven't seen my dishes.
So, but it's true. But everybody's different in the amount of stress that they've experienced and their baseline anxiety or stress levels. And we've all heard of PTSD. And so when I say that amygdala functioning helps memory, it's only to a degree, right? There has to be a balance. If you're too stressed, if you have students who are getting panic attacks during an exam, you're not going to remember a thing. It's kind of thought to be shutting down your hippocampus. And this is the scary thing, and this is kind of a sort of an aside, but if you're talking about PTSD or repressed memories, so something so traumatic where you have a child living through this that they kind of forget the memory, you think it's not consolidated at all. But what's happening is the hippocampus is still working. It's not like you have brain damage, but the amygdala is kind of giving off so much stimulation that it's kind of shutting down trying to shut down the hippocampus, which is just taking a very, very long, slow time to be consolidated. That's where you get memories later for something that happened maybe years ago. And it's chronic because it's that strongly consolidated, because it was such a slow process. And this goes back to kind of the short, slow studying every night and practicing every night rather than in the whole 10 hours, right? The slower the encoding and the consolidation, the more firm it is in your long-term memory, right? And we want to do it in this manner, not in the traumatizing manner, right? That's, yeah, but this happens in the brain, right?
I think there's also something to be said about, just, we were talking about the physical motion of, getting used to that, but also we were talking earlier about knowing what your given circumstances are and what they're going to be, that you're going to be in those stressful situations. Like what you're learning is going to be exposed to a lot of these environments. So just being aware of that, I think, is helpful to your preparation. Just knowing, accommodating for that, or just sort of knowing that you're going to be asked to call upon this work in situations where you might not feel centered normally. And so I think your preparation should, involve finding ways to center yourself in those situations, or working from a position of discomfort. And that can be sort of empowering when you know that it's coming. Like when because we've all been in those situations of disempowerment in that situation, so we know what that feels like. So when you do your work, spend some time accommodating for that and see what happens.
What have been some of the most challenging, or something if you want to share, having to memorize very quickly in situations? How have you handled that internally? I know you've talked about on the set when you've had to go and all of a sudden take all this technical information and put it that way. But have there been other situations? I mean, you've also done Shakespeare. So when you were doing Othello, do you want to touch on that? Like, have there been times when memorizing has been, oh my gosh, this has got to happen right now, and how you handled it?
Well, for Shakespeare, one of the things that I love about Shakespeare is that I find that the iambic pentameter is more often than not very useful to me. Like the meter. If it's prose, it can be its own challenge. But the scariest thing that ever happened to me was it was for an industrial. It was which is, it's like a commercial, but no money. No, it's like it was for a trade show for Canon, and actually the money was good, which is why I was excited about it. But basically, we had a week, and they gave me 12 pages of single-spaced text talking about the Canon, like all the different Canon cameras, like the DX1 and the whatever, and basically to perform it like a play in front of all these people that don't really give a rat's, they're just all there to be in the Javits Center. They're from all over the country, all over the world, and you're basically standing there saying, the Canon is better. The Canon DX this is better than the Sony this because of these reasons. It's got this inch sensor and a DMOSC and a whatever. 12 pages of it. And so basically, I was just terrified because there was going to be no teleprompter, there's going to be no, and you're just up there pretending that you're playing an expert, like 6 times a day in the Javits Center with thousands of people walking by you. And so it's that sort of thing where, like, nobody's really listening, but, but if they pay attention to you talking, then you're doing something wrong. So, because they're experts, they're the experts. It's sort of like you're supposed to tell them about the cameras that they know about.
Was
so,
that 5 years ago?
yeah.
I was there too.
Were you really?
Do you know what we ended up doing is they let us use an ear prompter.
Yeah. See, that scared me more though, because
Yeah. I don't know if anyone's ever worked with the ear, but it's, wow. It's like you're listening to yourself talking
and you're
after
like
it,
half
but
a
you
beat
still
before,
have to
right?
be, you recorded it and you have to still listen to yourself. Yeah, it's terrifying.
It was hard. It was also what made that so terrifying. Also, was just that feeling, because when you're doing, Othello, or you're doing, this thing, there's a sense of your artistic feeling of like what's necessary. It's sort of clear. Like this is why I wanted to do this in the first place. So this is a terror I understand. But the terror of learning about Canon sensors, for money, like that's basically what it was, and 12 pages of it for experts, like I didn't really know where my appetite was for that, other than just sheer terror. And that's a very hard way to learn things, like when you're just
But you did
afraid.
it.
Yeah, I did it.
Yeah, which is amazing. I mean, it's like you'll pull through whatever it takes. You did it. You
But
made
I
it
think I
happen.
might have some of that PTSD from that.
Probably forgot it all.
Well, this is a question that's from the audience. When is it too late to memorize? That's a really great question. Let's say you just showed up for a commercial audition and you're late and they want you to go into the room and all of a sudden you're given some, copy that you have to learn right away. Maybe Chester, you can speak to this. Is it ever too late to memorize? I mean, you're the memorizing king, so let us know.
I mean, I don't think that's the best question for me personally. In that, I mean, I always have to memorize things in, a few minutes or less, a large amount of information. But it's a really unique situation in the United States Memory Championship or World Memory Championship, where that's what the competition is. That's what I prepare all year for, is to memorize tons of information in a few minutes or less. So I don't think, in terms of for actors, I don't think you can memorize lines that fast. I mean, I'll let them. I don't think that's the best.
Well, the question is, so in terms of being able to memorize, you're practicing memorizing all the time, and I think that's something that you're telling us.
Yeah,
too,
I'm
that you're
just
always practicing it.
yeah.
That, right.
And,
I mean, that's
and
part of what you do.
that's part of what I do.
So
yeah.
your
I'm-
muscles for that.
I'm
are
just saying I don't
being
know if
trained.
that's the best condition. Like I don't know if it's
Right. Well, but if
um,
there's a job on the line and somebody is at the audition and they have to at least pull
Yeah.
something in for themselves,
Yeah.
to be able to take into the room. If you're, like you're suggesting, being able to practice memorizing,
Yeah.
that you'll be, at least your brain will, like you were talking, Joel, about once you've gotten along into the series that you're practicing all the time, memorizing.
Yeah, so basically, I don't have a good answer for the question, when is it too late to memorize? I don't have a good answer for that question at all, but I will say the more you practice, the better you get at memorizing even a large amount of information in a short period of time. Confidence is a huge factor in who does well in the United States Memory Championship, because there are a lot of people that just can't memorize under the pressure of the TV cameras and just the pressure of the competition. Being calm, cool, and collected is a big factor in whether or not you're actually going to be able to memorize what you need to memorize. So yeah, being stressed out is not is not the ideal. I am very calm, cool, collected under the pressure of the competition, but I think that's due to how much I practice.
Exactly, and I think that's wonderful. And there's no reason why, as actors, we can't practice with each other, that you could get some copy and have another friend, even if you can't get together. If you make the date, if you do something the next day and you say, I'm going to send you the copy, tomorrow we're going to do it. If you can't get together, do it on Skype. But that way you're always dealing with also the pressure of having something, if you're not auditioning every day or you're not working every day, to keep those muscles active. So I appreciate the question, because I think it's really helping us to see this is just a part of the daily life of being an actor. So we have to be able to do something. And if we're already in the practice of memorizing, we probably have a little better shot at it.
Can I just say one thing about that
Please.
situation? I think that in a situation like that, the way I'm interpreting the question is, you're in a situation where you're not going to be able to do your best, and you're not going to be able to fulfill that part of what's being asked of you, which is to memorize this thing. Then I think you're put in a situation where you just have to make a choice, and you have to be very clear about it. So what's the most important thing in the room? Is the most important thing in the room getting all the words right and getting it right? Is getting it right the most important thing? I don't think so. I think in the room, the most important thing, like you were saying, is being vivid, real, true to yourself, and tell the story. And even in a commercial. So I would just make a choice as clearly as I could in the moment and just let it go, which is that I'm not going to get all the words right. It's not going to happen. I absolve myself of that responsibility, and I give myself the new responsibility of being present in the room and conveying whatever general sense I have of the copy that I have to give in that moment. And then just letting the rest of it go, because then you have a chance. You have a chance to be present in the room. You have a chance to be interesting, as opposed to watching myself. I mean, you know, there's like 50 or 60 episodes of SVU out there, and where I'm doing basically the same thing over and over and over and over again. And some of them I'm successful, and a lot of them I'm not. And so if you ever, like, sometimes if one's ever on TV and you see, you're like, oh yeah, I'm watching him try to remember what the word is. That's not interesting, you know, like, it's just, you're watching me try to get it right. And it's very painful to watch those on TV, you know, like, when I see those, I'm like, oh my God. But it teaches you the lesson, which is that, oh, that's not important. That's not the most important thing. The most important thing is actually being present there. So if you're not in a situation to do your best, put yourself in a situation to do the best you can. And that's not trying to remember it in front of a camera.
And Chester, you had mentioned earlier about, can you speak to the idea of a photographic memory? Because I think that's a really interesting question. That people think, do people have photographic memories?
So my understanding is there's no such thing as a photographic memory, at least not how it's been portrayed to us in the media and movies like Good Will Hunting and A Beautiful Mind. In other words, no one can just glance at a sheet of paper, take a mental snapshot, and then perfectly reproduce that. 2 studies that have been done on this. One study, they will bring someone in that has an extraordinary memory for numbers. They will have that person memorize a grid of numbers. That person has no idea how they're going to be tested. They will have them recall a row from the grid left to right, and they will record the recall time. They'll say, okay, great job. Now please recall for us a row from that grid diagonally. Now, a lot of times the person is still able to do it, but the recall time is always much greater. So that's one way to actually find out how that person is going about remembering. It's not a photographic image that they're pulling up of the grid. If it were, you would expect the recall time to be about the same, because it's the same number of squares diagonally as it is left to right. So they're not just taking a snapshot of the grid. They're encoding that number sequence in a way where it's very powerfully encoded. It's meaningful to them, but it's not photographic image. Study 2, they will test someone with extraordinary memory in many different areas. Numbers, names, poetry, all sorts of things. And at some point, they'll just give them a random splattering of dots on the page. The random splattering of dots has no meaning whatsoever, forms no picture at all, and then they have them try to reproduce the random splattering of dots on the page, and no one has ever been able to do that. So that shows that when people have extraordinary memory ability, it's because they are somehow encoding it in a way that's meaningful to them. There are various ways they could have gone about doing it, but it's not just a mental snapshot.
Well, and I think that in all of this that we've been talking about is it's very personal. Finding out how you work best memorizing is really important. And that way it's not what's going to work for somebody else may not work for you, but to find the things that work best for you using some of these techniques, ones that fit for you, but also to practice it and find out, especially when you're adding the pressure. Because I think that's another aspect. People want a job. You want a job, or you want to keep a job once you've already got one, and memorizing is a big part of that. So I would like to thank our panelists tonight for their extraordinary insight and help on this topic. And if you each could just say how you can be reached, or if someone has extra questions. I know there were a lot of questions tonight, and we were trying to have everything written down ahead of time since we don't have mics in the audience, so that the people at home who are going to be watching it will be able to see that as well. So if you could just say maybe what's coming up for you, and also how people can reach you.
Sure. Again, I give speeches all around the world on memory. I have an upcoming speaking tour in Europe, in London, Amsterdam, Oslo, Prague, all sorts of places in Europe. My job is to train people to improve their memory and apply these memory techniques to various types of information you might tackle. You can find more information on me and my training at chestersantos.com or internationalmanofmemory.com. Either one, they go to the same website. Thanks for having me, everybody. Thank you.
Since I'm not an actor, I don't know, but if you want to contact me, I guess you could email me at my full name, lisason, Lisason, @gmail.com. And we're just going to continue to do research on learning and memory strategies for the normal educational population. Thanks.
You can reach me on Twitter at Joel De La Fuente, and I have I'm doing this show. Hemlock Grove has its 3rd season that's coming out on Netflix on October 23rd, and then this new series I'm doing for Amazon called The Man in the High Castle will drop on November 20th.
Wonderful. Thank you all, and if you can please fill out the evaluation form so that we can continue programming like this with the SAG Foundation. And a huge thank you to SAG Foundation for putting everything together tonight. Thank you.